everyone, in this video, having gone over some of the stuff with conditionals revisited and the stuff that we can do, we're now going to take a look at translations out of the book that involve conditionals and, of course, also conjunctions. Let's get into it.
What I want to do now is take a look at a couple of the translations out of the book. These are on page 51. So this is number 1. Let's take a look at A, B, C, D, and F. Let's start with A. The Heat makes it to the playoffs only if the Hawks lose to the Cavs. All right, there's that only if. Remember, as soon as you see it, put an arrow right through it. And so when I read that back, the Heat makes it to the playoffs. That's M, and then right there, arrow, only if the Hawks lose to the Cavs. So what this is really saying is, if the Heat make it, then the Hawks have lost to the Cavs. B. You're having a quiz average over 90 is a sufficient condition for being excused from the final. Well, sufficient condition means there's an arrow. And sufficient conditions go on the left side. So you're having a quiz average over 90 is the sufficient condition. So this thing goes on the left side for being excused from the final. Which means this is saying if you have a quiz average over 90, then you're excused from the final. C. Only if we can attract readers of your caliber in these early days of the Saturday Review education can we publish the magazine we have in mind. Now notice the first words in the sentence are only if. Now what I say still stands. As soon as you see only if, just draw an arrow right over it. So what follows the only if? Only if we can attract readers of your caliber these early days of the Saturday Review education. The can we publish? That goes on the left. So what this is really saying is if we can publish the magazine we have in mind, then we can attract readers of your caliber. Not how I would have worded that. But nevertheless, that's what's going on there. And still, the rule about only if applies. When you see it, just draw an arrow right over it. Okay, and now let's take a look at D here. Aquinas thought that the fact that the intellect is under the control of the will is a necessary condition for the existence of intellectual virtues. It's a necessary condition, so it's an arrow. And necessary conditions go on the right side of the arrow. So Aquinas thought that the control of the will is a necessary condition of the existence of intellectual virtues. This is out of Aquinas' disputed questions on the virtues. So yeah, if there are intellectual virtues, then the intellect is under the control of the will. That's a little medieval philosophy for you. And then finally here, let's take a look at F. I don't like it. This one's trying to trick you. I'm not going to give you one like this, but I'm just going to say this one is trying to trick you. Okay, it says, Hannah could save the company if only the president would promote her. So at first you might go, oh, yep, there's an only if. Let me draw an arrow right over it. There is not an only if there. It said, if only. That is not the same thing. The only if means cover that up with an arrow. You see, if only, that's like the only there is doing like it's modifying the if. Like, if only, like you're wishing really hard. Like, I really wish this if. That's all it's doing. It's not the same thing as only if. So that means here, we're dealing with an if. And whatever follows if, just plain vanilla if, goes on the left side of an arrow. So there's an arrow here, and whatever follows that. So what follows the if? The president would promote her. If only the president would promote her, Hannah could save the company. So if only they promote her, then she'd save the company. So she could save the company. So if she gets promoted, then she'll save the company. That's A, B, C, D, and F. So let's take a look. The other ones I want to take a look at are H, I, and L. Let's go ahead and get into those as well. All right, these next three are a bit more complicated. H, I, and L. And there's some others here that I'm skipping because they're more complicated than they need to be for our purposes. So H, I, and L. Let's take a look at H. It says this. If he is really determined not to run. Okay, we're ignoring the negations for now. We haven't talked about them yet. If he's really determined not to run, and if he wants to see the nomination go to someone who shares his viewpoint, then he should announce now that he is not a candidate. So what I see here, just on a cursory view, I see two ifs and a then. That's actually a hint. There's an arrow in here, so let's go ahead and stick that in there. Now, two ifs and a then. And I'm just going to say this. If you see two ifs and a then, that means you got an arrow, and usually the left side is going to be two things. Okay, let's see, especially if there's an and in between them. So if you see if one thing, blah, 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 and if another thing, blah, 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 then you're going to have a shape that looks like this. Something and something, arrow, some other thing. Let's see if that's what's going on here. If he's determined not to run, and if he wants the nomination to go to someone who shares his viewpoint. Yep, there we go. if he's determined not to run. And he wants to see the nomination go to someone else who wants to share his viewpoint. So if he wants both these things, then he should announce that he is not a candidate. If he wants this and this, then he should do this. That's what's going on with this one. I says this. Now, this is the kind of stuff that actually does happen in, like, if you ever wondered, like, playoff math, all right, or not just math, it's actually it's complicated logic proofs, all right, to figure out, like, if this team wins and this other team in the division loses and then this other team wins here, then that means this team is going to be the wild card team, that kind of thing, okay? Those kinds of things. How does that work? It's actually a complicated logic problem. The way the BCS system used to be as to what team would play in what bowl was even more convoluted. But that's what's going on here. So let's see this in practice. So look at this. It says, should the Dolphins win their division and defeat the Western champion? Remember, should means if, which means there's an arrow in here. And that comma, by the way, after champion means the then is starting now. It doesn't say the word then, but that's it. So everything that just said so far is on the left side of the arrow. So what do we got? If the Dolphins win their division and defeat the Western champion. So if they win their division and they defeat the Western champion. If both those things, well then what? Then the American Conference title game will be held Miami January 2nd only if the runner-up team beats Cleveland. There was an only if in there. So first of all this stuff is going to be together. We saw only if, put an arrow right over it. Be ye not tricked. And then write it exactly as it is. So what only if what? It says Miami only if, draw the arrow, runner-up. Okay, now I'm going to read it back in a little bit more of a conventional way to check it. It's saying this. If the Dolphins win and they defeat the Western champion, then if the game's in Miami, then the runner-up team has beat Cleveland. That's what's being said here. And this is correct. So like I said, there's another example of only, as soon as you see only if, pop that arrow right down. Don't think about, well, does it go this way? Just draw an arrow right there. I've literally done that in my book. Myself. I just draw the arrows right there on top of the words only if. You won't mess it up. Then finally, let's take a look at L here. It's not a particularly great one, but we'll do it. L says this. A prosperous, democratic Latin America is essential to hemispheric well-being. This was not really tricking you. It's just not clear based on the word that we've used so far. But we'll see if we can figure it out. So here's what I don't see. I don't see a sufficient condition. I don't see only if. And I don't see necessary condition as such. Well, I said as such because there is a word in here that's actually hinting at which one of those conditions is going on. I'm going to say this. The word is essential. So what's a synonym for essential? Necessary. So when it says here that a prosperous, democratic Latin America is essential to hemispheric well-being, it's very subtly saying a prosperous, democratic Latin America is a necessary condition for hemispheric well-being. I'm not going to do that to you on a quiz, but I just want you to, again, this is another example. Just know this stuff is out there. Not everybody tries to write their things clearly so they can be put into formal logic. But if we can figure out with formal logic what's actually going on, that can help us gain clarity in figuring out do these things actually work. Now, so far with all the proofs we've done and whatnot, everything works. Now, actually, towards the end of the semester, we're going to look at cases where we can figure out, well, does this work or not? We have like ways that we can test. Like, does this work? Is this valid? Or am I just missing something? Okay, did I mess up, or did the maker of the argument mess up? We'll look at those checks later on in the semester. So let's try and actually translate this one. So again, that prosperous, democratic Latin America, that's a necessary condition, which means it goes on the right side of the arrow. What goes on the right side of the arrow? Prosperous, comma, democratic Latin America. And it says this one has a glossary. P stands for Latin America prospers. D stands for Latin America is democratic. Well, it says a prosperous, democratic Latin America is essential. So that comma there is actually doing the work of a conjunction. So what it's saying here is, what's a necessary condition? These two things. This and this, P and D, are a necessary condition for hemispheric well-being. They are a necessary condition for W. So what does that mean? If you've got W, then you've got these two things. That's what this is saying. So if you've got hemispheric well-being, then Latin America must be prosperous and it must be democratic. Otherwise, you don't have this. and talk about that aspect a little bit later on.
Okay, so that was some translations from the book. What we're going to do in the next video is we're going to start taking a look at the number 3 problems, 3A, 3B, 3C, 3D, on the chapter If Again. See you next time.